So, what exactly is sports psychology?
First is obviously the mental health aspect that
To distinguish between a general psychology and a sports psychology.
educational type of work, awareness type of work. We conduct a lot of workshops for coaches, parents.
Really requires a lot of grit and determination. Welcome, viewers, to No Hurt Mentality. It's a career podcast, and in today's podcast, we are going to decode sports psychology. And to help us do that, I have with me Dr. Janki Deole. She's a co founder and director of Samiksha Sports, India's first sports psychology consultancy, with a goal to help Indian athletes achieve excellence. She has an exceptionally strong pedigree in sports psychology. She has done a BSc Psychology, Sports and Performance from UK, MSc Psychology, Sports and Exercise from UK, and she is also a PhD Psychology and Sports Science from UK. She is a former junior international tennis player. So let's welcome Dr. Janki. Thank
Thank,
you so much for joining us today.
thank you for having me.
Um, to understand all about sports psychology, let me start with the foundation and the fundamentals of sports psychology. So, what exactly is sports psychology and what are the core goals of sports psychology?
So there are two main aspects that sports psychology really looks into. The first is obviously the mental health aspect that we often seeing elite athletes also speaking about, and without positive good mental health, it's almost impossible to perform, right? So mental health is one aspect that is at the core of sports psychology, and the second aspect is about performance, right, and enhancing performance and how sports psychology can contribute towards performance enhancement. So broadly speaking, there'd be these two things that would be the core of sports psychology.
And how did sports psychology as a field got developed? And what inspired you to pursue a doctorate in sports psychology?
So I think fortunately, I think I've Samiksha, my company, and I as a part of it. I think um, we've been able to play a role in the evolvement of sports psychology within the country. But of course, I've studied and spent a lot of years in the UK to get an understanding of how the field had evolved there, and what are some of the key things to help integrate sports psychology in sports science, or within team settings, academy settings, so on and so forth. But I think the way it has evolved is just by the by making coaches, parents, academies, institutions, building a lot of awareness and psychoeducation about how what kind of impact it has on young athletes, elite athletes, even with coaches, parents, who are all stakeholders within the domain of sport, right? So I think a lot of awareness building in the first initial years has been very key. And I think Samiksha has played an integral part where, today we're definitely better than where we were 10, 15 years back. So, like I said, a lot of psychoeducation, awareness workshops, to help people understand how sports psychology can benefit in both these areas. Like I said, one is the mental health aspect within athletes, and the second is the performance enhancement. Um, to come to your second question as to what motivated me, like I used to play tennis as a junior, and of course, like any athlete, worked quite hard, I'd like to believe, put in a lot of time on court. When I was playing, there was also a lot of emphasis on fitness by then. So there would be extra fitness sessions happening. We would have a specialist fitness coach, stuff like that. So I think the physical areas within sport were quite developed. We had camps where, we would have different coaches. So I think there's a lot of focus on the technical and the physical aspect. I personally actually found myself not performing to my own, I think, potential in competitions. And what at that time what I believed was I needed to put in more time on court and spend more time, maybe working on my forehands or my serves or backhand or whatever it was. But then as I started growing older, till 14, that's basically what I did. After that, I started understanding, and also my parents who played an important role, that it's probably not only technical or tactical, right? It's not only going on court and spending those hours, but in competition or in matches, your mindset plays a very important role. So you may have the best forehand or, an amazing serve. But if you're not in the right mindset, if you're not feeling confident, if you have a lot of self-doubt creeping in, you're not going to be able to hit that serve when it matters. So that's where I started becoming more aware of the fact that the mind played in sport. And I was actually fortunate to have a mentor by the name of Mr. Bhishmaraj Bam. He also worked with a lot of elite players. I was probably nowhere comparable to him, but he wasn't a sports psychologist or a psychologist. He drew a lot of knowledge and taught a lot through Indian philosophy, Indian psychology, and yoga. But it was what we worked on was the mental aspect. And I think that contributed a whole lot in helping me play better, play to my potential, also helping me understand the power that the mind possesses, when it comes to performance. He actually worked with the likes of a Sachin Tendulkar or Rahul Dravid or an
Wow.
Anjali Bhagwat. So he had a lot of experience working with really elite athletes. He actually was from the police department himself. So he also drew a lot of stuff about mental toughness, resilience. He also trained, the defense, I believe, in these areas. So, it was very interesting to see how he worked with the mind, and I experienced that firsthand myself. And then as I started growing up, I also had the opportunity to kind of shadow a lot of his work, me and Gayatri both actually. And that's
Oh,
also
that's
how Samiksha was
wonderful.
born, mainly inspired by him. So yeah, that's actually how it began. So
Wow, that's a wonderful, fascinating story, and truly, mind over muscle.
yeah, absolutely. And we believe so, me and Gayatri were also, she played badminton for India as well. We were quite young back then, and like I said, he actually mentored us and had us believe that we could actually create an ecosystem and create something for Indian athletes. If we were a handful of us who had an opportunity to interact with somebody like him, but at that time we did not have any formal sports psychologist in the country at all. So, and this was is a concern at some point or the other for most athletes. And if not a concern, there are areas of mental development which help you do better, not only in sport, but also outside of sport. So that's it. Actually how Samiksha was born, where we felt that, Indian athletes needed access to something like this.
Both of you have done a fantastic job. Really, hats off to you. You
Thank
have
you.
actually, Samiksha has played a pivotal role in bringing sports psychology to the forefront.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd like to believe so. We've been grateful to have, the right, like I said, the right mentors, right guides. I think that's been a big part of our journey, being able to enable this in the country.
So, how difficult was it to make inroads? Because it's very hard for people still to distinguish between a general psychology and a sports psychology. So,
Yeah.
how hard was it to get the ball rolling when you began your journey with
I
Samiksha?
think more than psychology versus sports psychology. Of course, that's one of the factors. But even psychology in itself in the
Hmm.
country wasn't as valued, or there was a sense of taboo. Sometimes
Correct.
there is a sense
Correct.
of taboo. So I think
Absolutely.
sports psychology is at another level where
Hmm.
we are actually hoping that mentally healthy people seek out for sports psychology. So in the initial years, of course, it was quite tough, because whether it's parents, coaches, administration, there wasn't awareness, like I said, or They didn't, a lot of people didn't understand what it is that we really do. What kind of contribution can we really make. So a lot of time had to be spent in doing work to helping, the right people, stakeholders, understanding, these factors of how sports psychology can really um, have a value add in the life of an athlete. So yeah, like I said, a lot of educational type of work, awareness type of work. We conduct a lot of workshops for coaches, parents, in building awareness for this.
Really requires a lot of grit and determination.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I speak to aspiring psychologists or sports psychologists, I think one of the key is to, find that commitment and dedication, um, because it isn't easy. Of course, easier now than what it was for us maybe 15 years back. But still, it really has to be a passion, something that you really care about, to be able to, be in this space and work in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, on that note, how can one become a sports psychologist? This question is very relevant to the students
Yeah.
who are aspiring to be one.
Yeah. Good question. I think there are various pathways, I would say, to becoming a sports psychologist. One pathway is to study abroad, of course. There are a lot of courses in Australia, UK, US, which specialize in the field of sports psychology. I mean, all the different pathways that I'm talking about will obviously have its own pros and cons, and I think parents and students need to be aware and make sure that they do their research well in understanding these pros and cons. For example, all these Western countries have their governing bodies in psychology. So Britain will have the British Psychological Association, US has the American Psychological Association, so on and so forth. So the programs and the courses are regulated, which is great because it gives you a system through which you can study and then also work if you're interested in working outside of India. These programs are also well established, meaning that they've been running for many years now. So that's a big, I would say, a plus. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the other pathway is that we also now have programs and courses and masters in sports psychology in India. There are a couple of courses across India, which are new and upcoming, which is great. A pro here is that, students are not spending
Correct.
equivalent to what you would spend going abroad. So it makes education to sports psychology again available and financially viable for students, so that doesn't become a limitation. So from that point of view, uh, that's something that's great. um, I think in the long run it's also important because we want to be self-reliant to a great extent. These Indian programs and courses, I'm sure, will provide a lot of value in having many good sports psychologists for the country.
Yeah.
So although they're new and upcoming, something that's definitely valuable. So that's something that students can look at. Um, and the third route I would say is that, um, you know, India does not have a governing body, so you don't necessarily have to do a master's in sports psychology to become a sports psychologist.
Okay.
And we have very good programs across the country and a lot of programs which are very strong in fields such as counseling psychology, organizational psychology, which have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of overlap from a theoretical point of view with sports psychology, right? So
Okay.
although you're not gaining a sports psychology degree,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to good colleges, good universities, good faculty. Um, these, like I said, these courses are just as established as a master's sports psychology degree abroad, for example. So you're getting good exposure to, some of the skills that you're going to need as a sports psychologist as well. For example, counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then, for example, at Samiksha, we offer a training program. So even if you've done a counseling psychology, it shouldn't limit you from exploring an option to become a sports psychologist.
Okay.
So then, whatever gap there is between what you've learned in a counseling psychology degree,
Mm-hmm.
which you need to kind of fill up before practicing as a sports psychologist, You
Mm-hmm.
have courses and programs that help you fill that gap, so you're ready to work as a sports psychologist. So I would say these three are very kind of are options that any student who's interested in psychology,
Okay.
sports psychology, can look at. A lot of times, the third option, like I said, is also you helpful because students are not sure whether it is sports psychology that they want to do.
Correct. Correct.
So there are broader programs like counseling
Mm.
psychology, where what you're gaining can be implemented in any setting. Uh,
Mm.
so it's almost like doing a general MBA versus a specialized
Right.
MBA. So yeah, these three pathways I would say are something that students and parents can look at.
Very insightful.
Yeah.
Just one question, in 11th and 12th, in
Yes.
order to pursue sports psychology, are
Yeah.
there any particular specific subjects or a stream that you need to take in order to get into sports psychology?
So broadly, psychology as a field in India is considered as an art field. Um, we have some programs which are BSc psychology, but broadly speaking, I mean, 95% of colleges or universities or the field on its own is looked at as an arts field. So typically, 11th, 12th, a student would look at taking up arts. Within
Mm-hmm.
arts, you have psychology as a main subject. You also have some supplementary subjects that help you in psychology, such as sociology.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, along with psychology, looking at what are the other programs that are or subjects that are offered that go in alignment with your development within psychology is something that students can look at. So, um, and then you do a BA in psychology, and then you do an MA in whatever you specialize at a master's level. So you
Mm-hmm.
can there's clinical psychology, counseling
Correct.
psychology, sports psychology, in some universities. There's organizational psychology.
Mhm. Correct.
You can
So
specialize.
basically, it's open to all the streams. Even after doing science, you can go
Yeah.
for a BSc in sports psychology, like you said, or just a BSc in
BSc, there's no course which is a BSc in sports psychology, but there is a BSc applied psychology course, for example,
all right. Yeah,
right?
correct.
If you've studied psychology in your 11th, 12th, it gives you
Mm-hmm.
some basis or
Some
some foundation.
background, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it doesn't mean that you can't take it up. So there are students who will do maybe even engineering and then move to
Yeah.
psychology, right? So it
We have
doesn't
seen
stop.
those cases.
Yeah. So it's not a limitation, but if you're sure about your, career pathway and what you want to do, then obviously it's ideal to kind of choose the right subjects from the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so true, so true. Now your organization, Samiksha, has
Yeah.
also, I mean, has worked with Olympic, Commonwealth, World, and Asian Games medal winners.
Yeah.
So, in this section, I would
Yeah.
like to now ask you some very relevant and pressing questions around the athlete's mental health.
Yeah.
What are some of the common mental health challenges that athletes face?
Okay. So maybe I will combine, the challenges that are most common, okay, whether mental health or performance related.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One of the biggest one is, of course, pressure. Pressure that is, can be experienced from what's happening on field, or it can be pressure which is external, which is off the field sort of pressure. I think that's an important factor to address many times. Um, as Indians, we're also generally quite emotional in nature, with quite heightened emotions, which also has its pros and cons, like everything. So to manage emotions is something that's also very key, and and we do a lot of work based on that area. So I would say that these two would be, I think, at the top in terms of uh, you know addressing or working on with athletes.
So, given that, what is the significance of mental training
Yeah.
in daily athletic routines?
Yeah. So, I mean, what is sports psychology? We're basically trying to understand and see how performance has an impact on emotions, and sometimes emotions have an impact on performance. So it's kind of cyclical in nature, and with every athlete, it kind of manifests in different ways, right? So depending on how it manifests is how mental training works. So to give you an example or an analogy, let's say when you go to a doctor and you say you have fever, right?
Mm-hmm.
One experiences fever, but patient A may say I have fever and a stomach upset or a stomach ache, right? Patient B may say that I have fever, but also my throat has been hurting. And then the intervention then is based on, how it's kind of representing, right? How the patient is representing those symptoms. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very similar with the mind as well. So, an athlete may say that, I have pressure, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but the sources of pressure might be very different for player A and player B. And based on that is how the intervention is planned. So it's not, it's not like one formula fits all sort of a scenario. It's very individualized. So
Mm-hmm.
the mental training of athletes will differ based on that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but typically, to answer your question, every athlete will follow a mental training routine or a mental fitness routine for about 10 to 15 minutes a day.
All
It's
right.
good enough to begin with, to ensure that you're able to address things that you need to address uh,
Mm-hmm.
for your mental health or for your performance, whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now, any athlete,
yeah,
an athlete can be in any sport.
yeah,
Every athlete, at some point in time, faces failures and injuries.
yeah.
So, how does an athlete overcome that?
Yeah. So, um, again, this is it's very generic and it will differ a lot from athlete to athlete. But we know, like you're saying, we know this as a fact that these are situations that are going to occur, right? And a lot of our work is more of preventive work rather than curative work, where we're not waiting for the athlete to go through an injury and then
Mm-hmm.
teaching or working with an athlete to understand now how to cope with it, right? But more like preparing them that in a way where they become competent and equipped to handle it when these things occur. And that's the perspective that we look at from for mental training, where there are, like you said, there are going to be failures, obstacles, challenges, and we know that. So it is to prepare an athlete where when it does occur, they know how to manage and handle themselves and have learned the right coping mechanisms, rather than waiting for a slump or a failure and then say, okay, let's work on this now. Um, yeah.
Can you share some techniques to help athletes cope up with this pre competition nerve?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of techniques, some commonly known techniques are something like visualization, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which is valuable in, building confidence before matches. There are breathing techniques that can help. There are concentration techniques, exercises. So, depending on what the athlete needs, simple things like affirmation, self-talk, these are some of the commonly used techniques that are implemented with athletes and that athletes use and find beneficial.
And it helps in reducing the performance anxiety.
Yeah, so depending on, like I said, anxiety is a very broad term.
Broad
Okay,
spectrum,
anxiety,
yeah.
yeah. Anxiety can, for athlete A, it could mean that he has a lot of butterflies in the stomach, heart is beating faster, legs get stiff, things like that, which is appearing in a very somatic way, right? So the techniques then used would be in a manner which are going to help him with those sort of symptoms. For somebody else, it could be, overthinking a whole lot, worrying a whole lot. So it could be more cognitive in nature, right? And then the work that you would do or the interventions or the techniques that you would use are different. So
Like those cognitive behavioral therapies, etc.
yeah, some of those things can also be used or are used during sessions. So but yeah, these are some commonly used techniques, to work to help in preparing an athlete mentally for performance.
And how is burnout identified and prevented?
So I think that's a topic on its own. But burnout does not appear one fine day. There are again a lot of symptoms. There will be fatigue, for example, that will be observable. Um, Even in terms of from a mental perspective, you will see mood changes, you will see irritability, A lot of
Mhm.
things. I'm just naming some things that are coming to my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
It's something that can be identified when you see an athlete is probably headed towards burnout. So that being aware, parents, coaches, everybody around the athlete being aware of what those symptoms are. Um, and and of course, I think in today's day, training is also very scientific, where things are periodized. Athletes are not just overexerted. And I think parents also play a very important role. A lot of times it's not about the number of hours that you're putting in. And I think training also has to be aligned with the age that the athlete is at. But if things are done in the right way and a scientific way, um, an athlete will not experience burnout. But if an athlete is headed there, there are ways to find that out, right? Um, Again, an analogy that I can give you is that, you have a candle, okay, and the candle has a flame, and before the flame kind of dies out, right, there are various steps that you see the flame reducing, you see the flame flickering, you see some smoke, right, and then it dies out. Okay, and these are some of the steps that are helping you understand that the candle is going to die out. Similarly, even with an athlete, there are many aspects and factors that can help you understand that the athlete is leading to burnout.
And because athlete is training with the coach or the team leader on an everyday basis, so does that responsibility of identifying the burnout falls on the coach or the trainer's shoulder, as in they are the ones who can blow the whistle at the right time?
I think the responsibility is everybody who's a part of the team with the athlete. Of course, a coach or a trainer who's with the athlete a whole lot more has higher chances of observing it. But it doesn't mean that the responsibility is solely theirs. It's everybody within the team who needs to be aware and should be aware of what burnout is and what can lead an athlete to burnout. It could be the physio, it could be the SNC, it could be a psychologist, it could be a nutritionist. You never know, how you're going to be able to, what's going to help you recognize. So all the experts or the team of the athlete, I think the responsibility is kind of equally shouldered by everybody, including the coach or the trainer, I would say.
Understood.
Yeah, and
Now,
also
yeah,
parents, I think, equally.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
eventually the athlete goes back home.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Samiksha has some highly prestigious clientele to boast of that you have been serving for over a decade now. And some of the most sought after names include Prakash Padukone Badminton Academy, Virat Kohli's Foundation, BCCI, All India Tennis Association, Paralympic Committee of India, and the list goes on. Now, considering that you have such a enriching body of experience, I am really intrigued to ask my next set of questions, which is that how do sports psychologists help athletes focus or maintain focus during the competition? You know, we often hear of a phrase called the flow state. What does it actually mean and how is it achieved?
So again, how it's achieved is very different for every athlete. And it's about, what is it that gets the athlete in the right mindset. And also mindset is a very I mean, the right mindset is also very fluid. You may start a match in a great frame of mind or in the flow state or in the zone, right? But you may lose the first few points, or you may be beaten in the first few balls. So your mindset may change, right? So what you do and how you work on your mental aspect through a match also depends on how you get yourself into the flow state. Also will vary from situation to situation. um, but again, there are techniques that are used, some concentration techniques. There are also a lot of techniques I personally feel are useful from yoga, which help. For example, there's a technique called Tratak,
Yeah.
right, which helps you work on focus.
Where
So
you have to focus on the flame of the candle for some
yeah,
time.
Yeah, yeah. So I think to work on focus and concentration, getting into the zone, different things work for different athletes. For example, one of the athlete that I work with, um, what works for him is he's a tennis player, and let's say if he's not going through a good phase in the match, right? What works for him to get into this flow state is to think of a positive memory. Okay, and what he likes to think about is a time when he was a child with his mom on the beach, right?
Wow,
So this has
how
nothing to do with
interesting.
what's happening on the court, but it's just getting him in the right frame of mind to play the next point. So it can be as unique as something like that uh, to some of the techniques that I mentioned before, which are typical sports psychology techniques. So I think you have to really understand what's going to work for the athlete to help him get into the right mindset or in the flow state or in the zone, to help him or her achieve that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does a group dynamic affects the team performance?
So in team sport, of course, the group dynamic is very important. Even in individual sport, it is because we're working. It's a multidisciplinary approach that we're taking most times, especially when it comes to elite sport, where you're also working with the coach. I mean, for example, a sports psychologist is also coordinating with the coach, giving feedback or taking feedback from the coach, also working alongside maybe physio, taking some inputs. Let's say in a case of injury, so even in individual sport, it's, I think, just as important. In team sport, it's important within the team setting as well. And a lot of times, the team dynamic or the culture within the team is actually setting up the right environment and the climate for the athlete to perform, right?
Hmm.
So an ex-athlete might be, very good on his own, but if the environment isn't right, he's
Hmm.
probably not going to be able to deliver.
So
Um,
true.
yeah, so again, you understand, I'd like to give analogies, but you
Sure. No, that's a fantastic way of explaining
yeah,
things.
but let's say there's a fish pond and there's a fish in it and the fish is unwell. A lot of
Mm.
times you may try to medicate the fish, okay, but many times the problem is the water and the water needs to be clean.
Mm.
And this kind of phenomena is very important to understand in a team setting and team sport, that there are fish, but there's also the water, and the water needs to be clean and maintained, and needs to have proper hygiene for you know the
Correct.
people to perform.
Yeah, the environment has to be very
Yeah,
conducive. It plays a
yeah,
very important role as
yeah,
well.
absolutely.
In a case where the academy has not hired a sports psychologist, how much can a coach or a trainer influence the mental state of the athlete?
I think to a great extent. I mean, one is in influence, definitely. Maybe not deliver sports psychology, that may not be possible,
Of
but
course.
I think the coach is the first point of contact for an athlete, especially young athletes, who are at an impressionable age, whose belief about the sport and performance is being formed. And I think one of the key contributors to that is the coach and the communication of the coach with the athlete, with the parents, how they're talking to the athletes during training, before matches, after matches. I think has a big influence on the motivation of the child, the confidence of the child. I think after the parent, it's only the coach. So I think the influence can be um, very big, and hopefully positive, right? So yeah, I think they're a big contributor to the mental state and the belief of young athletes.
So, do sports psychologists also work with the coaches and trainers? In case an athlete cannot afford to hire and keep
Yeah,
uh, a personalized sports psychologist for themselves.
yeah.
So, do you train coaches and trainers of the academy so that they can, in some way, be the counselors for their team?
Yeah, I mean, we in today's day we have, only a handful of sports psychologists who are experienced or professionally trained, and hopefully that will change in the coming years, and it should change. But So we can't be everywhere, but the coaches are there with the athlete all the time, seeing them in training every day. So I think coach education and awareness has been very integral to us. We feel that, they are a big medium to enhance the psychological state of athletes. So we do work extensively with coaches. Like I said, there is a large part that coaches can contribute to from a psychological perspective. So like I said, motivation, confidence, handling emotions. Young players are observing how coaches are responding when they're making mistakes, when they're doing well, after a win, loss, like I said. So there are many factors within psychology where coaches can contribute and work on with athletes through their training as well. And I think that's also a more sustainable way to do it, where we are empowering coaches to at least do some foundational work with the young athletes. So we do a lot of work with coaches actually, across the country. Yeah.
I think one of the toughest thing is to provide the psychological feedback in a way that it doesn't demoralize or harm the confidence
Yeah.
uh, of the athlete,
Yeah.
whether through a sports psychologist or a coach,
Yeah.
or like you said, there are multiple stakeholders, be it
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's at the key of it, right? I mean, for whether it's a coach or a psychologist or a nutritionist, having and gaining and having and maintaining the trust of the athletes or the parents is important and remains, at the base of everything. And only if you're able to do that can you do any work further. Without that, you will probably not be able to have any impact whatsoever. So I think that's something that becomes is a foundation to, any professional working with the athlete or the parent.
Now, talking of trust, do you face any ethical issues in your sports psychology profession?
Um, Fortunately, over the last whatever 15 plus years, I haven't, or we haven't at the company, we haven't faced any problems as such. I think we have a very clear and open way of working. Some of the things that you need to do as a professional is provide the right information to the parents, gain consent whenever you need to gain it, providing feedback in an appropriate way. So I think as long as you're able to maintain your ethical guidelines, which are key, I think, to anybody, like I said, um, you shouldn't be facing problems. So I personally haven't gone through any scenario or situations which has been problematic from an ethical or a confidentiality perspective.
Uh, One of the biggest concern of parents while hiring a sports psychologist or any psychologist for that matter is how will the confidentiality between the athlete and the psychologist will be maintained.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, I think just having, I mean, in your first interaction or, giving parents that clarity about how it's going to be maintained, what are the factors where it is going to be maintained, what are the factors where, information may have to be divulged. So being clear and communicating that is very important. For example, although we are working in the field of sports psychology, sometimes we do come across athletes where the concerns could emerge, which are more clinical in nature. Uh, so even before we refer, we have to the confident I mean, even if the confidentiality is with the athlete, if we are working with the athlete through the academy, or if it is a parent, and we come across scenarios such as self-harm or suicide ideation, things like that, which are harmful if we keep them confidential. So having the right guidelines to follow, and following them with the conduct that you have to, I think, and as long as that's kind of communicated to the right people, I think it's not a problem. So I think having that clarity from the outset is important.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
And finally, I will sum up this podcast by asking you one last question. what are some of the emerging areas of research or emerging trends in the field of sports psychology?
Like I said, pressure, stress, these are some fields that are very interesting. One of the one of the concerns, maybe I didn't mention earlier in today's day is sleep and lack of sleep, and sleep being an important factor in recovery, where young athletes are not getting enough of it, affecting performance. I think that's a very interesting area of research as well. Yeah, I would say these two areas also, maybe looking at young athletes, what are the important psychological attributes that one needs to work at a younger age group, uh, is key as well.
And what will be your one advice to the aspiring sports psychologists?
So from my experience, whenever I interact, or we actually do interact a whole lot with young psychologists or aspiring sports psychologists, sometimes who apply to us, and very often, it comes across as, as a, and I understand it, as a young aspiring psychologist, you're looking for something that feels glamorous. It takes a lot of hard work, and it's a journey to get there. But sports psychology is not only about the elite, or about, you know, working in IPL, or directly with an Olympian, or so and so forth. It's good to have those goals, and you will reach those goals, but to have the patience to take it one step at a time, and also actually realize that it's your satisfaction really as a sports psychologist is when you're with that athlete through the journey of being a young athlete to making it there. At the top, you're probably going to make very little difference. The athletes are much older. They also have their own experience of what works, what doesn't work. But I think for us especially, the most satisfying work has been working with the younger population. And they are the ones who are going to be the next generation. Um, for example, if you're looking at 2036 Olympics, probably in India, we're looking at 8 to 12-year-olds in India today. And I think there should be kind of vision for that, and looking to work with young athletes who you start working with at that age, and be with them till they're reaching 2036.
That's
I
very
think I think to have that perspective, rather than saying that, okay, now I'm finished my masters and I want to work with X league or Y league. I think, according to me, should not ideally be the goal at the outset. You will get there with your patience and passion. uh, but to look at the grassroots and the younger population is very fascinating, according to me.
That's such a profound advice. So, on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Janki, for giving us the knowledge and the clarity about sports psychology. I think it is very, very pertinent in the day and time we are in to understand the importance and the need to have sports psychologists
Yeah,
if
thank you.
someone is pursuing sports competitively or professionally.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. You were listening to No Herd Mentality Conversations. Please subscribe to our channel for more such in depth conversations. I'm Ruchika signing off on behalf of No Herd Mentality. Thank you.